in order for us to understand the importance of that spirit for the Spiritism and the Christianism and Christ's message, because for at least 500 years before the encounter with Chico Xavier, he was already very active in spreading the message of Christ to the humanity. So in 1861, there was a message signed by Emmanuel. It is called Selfishness. It is a very pungent message where he shows that the selfishness is like a plague that needs to be taken away from our hearts. And he mentions, in fact, the senator Pontius Pilatus, not the senator, the governor Pontius Pilatus, talking about the difference between the selfish Pilate and the selfless Jesus. And in that difference, how to choose, instead of selfishness, to choose charity. Chico Xavier reveals that surely this message was written by that Emmanuel that we are talking about. It is in the chapter 11, in the item 11 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. In 1927, Chico Xavier was in a farm, in a prayer group, before he founded his Spiritist groups and Spiritist centers. He used to go to several friends' homes to have meetings and to pray, to study the Gospel. And in 1927, Emmanuel introduces himself to the owner of the farm, Mrs. Carmen Peracio, during the prayer. And then she hears that voice introducing himself. I am Emmanuel, Chico's spiritual friend. And she has the chance to see that spirit that presents himself to her. He was a very imposing young man with religious vests and with a shining aspect. So then 1927, that is the first description of the Spirit Emmanuel. But also, in 1931, a very important encounter happened between Emmanuel and Chico Xavier. Chico Xavier used to go on the weekends to a stream close to his house with his family to enjoy the nature, to pray. In that very Sunday in 1931, his sisters couldn't go, so then he goes alone. Coincidence or not, we'll never know. But when he was there alone, he has that vision. A bright cross appears before him, and the silhouette of this old, gentle man, dressed as a priest as well. That is the place where they met each other, actually. It's beautiful. Not by chance that Chico would go there to pray. It's a beautiful, peaceful place. And while they were there, there was the very first conversation between them. And it was a very important conversation. I put it here for you because it was very interesting. Many of us probably know some stories that were being told. And that is a very important one. Emmanuel asks, are you really willing to work with mediumship? And then of course Chico, very humble, if the spirits don't abandon me. And Emmanuel said, oh, you are not going to be forsaken or abandoned. But you need to study and to dedicate yourself to good. And Chico, still doubtful, do you think I'm going to make it? I'm going to accept that commitment? Of course, as long as you respect 3 principles or 3 rules. And the first one was discipline. And the second one, discipline. And of course, by the 3rd time, I think Chico Xavier knew the answer. And of course, it was discipline. And a very interesting proposal happening that day. We're going to start writing 30 books. So, the first 30 books were finished in the year 1947. The first 30 books were done. So then, of course, that Chico Xavier comes to Emmanuel. I am done. We are done with that commitment. Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to take care of my life. Emmanuel said, well, you know, our spiritual friends here that take care of that work said that we could renew that contract. So I think we could go for 60, right? We did that very fast. So we could go for 60. Chico. Okay, then. In 1958, only 11 years after, they reached 60 mark. So then Chico Xavier, okay, we made it. So we are done. Let me finish the contract. Emmanuel said, it was so easy, right? Let's go for 100 now. 30, 60, 100. It's just numbers, right? Let's go for it. So Chico, by this time, I believe that he knew already what was going to happen. Of course, he accepts that commitment. And 100 books were written. After the 100th book was written, Chico Xavier, of course, comes back to Emmanuel. And Emmanuel comes with a very surprising information to Chico Xavier. That the superior spirits that were taking care of all that work of publication of those very important messages for the humanity said that from that time on, the reincarnation of Chico Xavier was not in the hands of Chico Xavier anymore. From then on, they suspended the rights of Chico's own reincarnation free will. From now on, your reincarnation and your mediumship is in our service to do the work that we need to do to help people. So Chico Xavier was very intelligent, of course, and already very well studied in the Spiritism, and said, what about the free will? What about I am the owner of my own body? What if I refuse to do that? Emmanuel said, by the same determination that came to me saying that your reincarnation is suspended to our service, because of that determination, you have the right to refuse, but we are going to take you away from your body right away. And I think he changed his mind right away, and he was just very quiet, and he decided, let's go forward with this whole project. And in fact, after, more than 71 years, only between 1931 until 2002, when he discarnated, 71 years of that relationship, for 151 books written through Chico's mediumship. There are controversies, okay? I've tried to find the most precise number. Many of Chico's books were actually published after his discarnation as well. 155 books written by Emmanuel himself, according to one very important medium and lecturer in Brazil, Wagner Gomes da Paixão. He did that research. 155 books written by Emmanuel. And why today we decided here to talk specially about those 4 books that are part of a collection called Studying the Codification. Especially in the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s, Emmanuel, through several publications, starts to dedicate himself, together with other very important spirits, to disseminate, to explain, to study and to comment the studies of Allan Kardec, together with passages of the Gospel. So that project was a project organized by Emmanuel. And in the introduction of the book, The Religion of Spirits, which is a series of messages, there were 91 comments on questions from the Spirit's book. They would say that we will find in this publication something a little different. It was not a book written from the beginning to the end. Those messages, those 91 messages, had already been written during public meetings in the state of Minas Gerais during the year of 1959. And the following books, The Ministry of Mediums, The Spirit of Truth, and Divine Justice as well, were like that. There were messages published in several different regular Spiritist publications in Brazil that the Spirits and Emmanuel decided to compile and to put it together in chronological order for us to have the chance to, in reading one question of the Spirit's book, refer to those comments and to those studies and have the chance to develop our understanding and to bring that understanding to a level of our daily life practice in order to help us to have a more daily life Christian practice and a daily life Spiritist practice. Of course, that only a spirit like Emmanuel would have the chance to help Chico Xavier in that relationship to be the living example of the spiritual practice while he was incarnated, and the moral authority to correct Chico Xavier when necessary, and to give directions and advice to Chico Xavier, helping Chico Xavier to be today the most important living example that we have of a Spiritist man, 100% a Spiritist man. And of course that Emmanuel needed to study and to learn a lot. It is said that on weekends, on Sundays, Emmanuel would go to superior plans in the spirituality to learn about the gospel, for instance. And he would tell Chico Xavier that when he would come back from those meetings, he would say, "I look like a primate," comparing with the levels and layers of understanding that we can take from the gospel. Of course, that we can take from the Spiritism as well. So that mission was very important because it gives us lots of elements and many more keys to unlock the essence and understanding of the works of Allan Kardec and the message of Jesus. That is the book, The Religion of Spirits. That is the first book of that collection, published in 1960. And that is going to be the book that we are going to study during the month of August. And also, we will come back to that book in the month of December, because there is more to study from this book. And in September, we will have the study of the Ministry of Mediums, and then in October, the Spirit of Truth, and then in November, the Divine Justice. All referring to 4 of the 5 works of Allan Kardec. As I said, it is just a compilation taking the religious content of the Spirit's book. That's why he chose 91 of the more than 1,000 questions on the Spirit book. And each message is a comment on one of those questions. And it was arranged in chronological order. Today we understand that fulfilling the project of Jesus as our Master and the governor of the spiritual direction of the planet and us and its inhabitants, the promised consoler, the Spirit of Truth, the Spiritism comes to us. And to continue that mission, Emmanuel continues to clarify, to develop and make accessible the essence of Jesus' message in the light of the Spiritism. It is the universal truth first brought to us as the understanding of the one and only God and His immutable laws brought by Moses, fulfilled by Jesus, developed in its essence through the Spiritism codified by Allan Kardec, and brought to life in the Christian and Spiritist everyday practice by Emmanuel. And not only by Emmanuel, we dare to say that there are so many spirits today that have beautiful, very important, and with fidelity to the doctrine message to us, citing Emmanuel together with Chico Xavier, even citing Joana de Angelis together with Divaldo Franco, which probably we will have the chance to learn about her, who knows, by next year. So there is just a little teaser for all of us of what is ahead of us in terms of learning, in terms of sharing so much that we need to learn about the Spiritism and about Jesus, because Emmanuel recovers the fidelity to Jesus' messages in his publications, in his messages, in his work, and in his mediumistic practice with Chico Xavier. I hope I gave you enough to be excited for the rest of the year, and we are very grateful to have you here again. And let's all be immersed in that Christian and Spiritist light that came to us and is still here for us in order to be nurtured by all of that. Thank you very much and have a great long weekend.
Thank you, Tiago, for the great lecture. And we have a few minutes, and welcome to have any questions. I know Tiago will handle them. I can't.
Yes.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that Chico Xavier said that Emmanuel has reincarnated.
Yeah. Well, those are stories from those who lived together with Chico Xavier. In the year 2000, while Chico Xavier was together with some friends, one of those friends mentioned that afterwards that he was taken away from his body temporarily, and he was taken to a place. So he went to a hospital, and he had the chance to see a baby being born. And then when he comes back from this trance, he announces to everyone, very happy, that Emmanuel had just reincarnated in one city in the state of São Paulo. And some people asked, so are we going to know him? And Chico Xavier said, yes, you will recognize him, and he will be a teacher. That's what Chico Xavier said. There are several publications from friends of Chico Xavier, people who worked with him, people who were present in his meetings throughout all those years of mediumistic practice. And they are more and more, publishing stories about their relationship with Chico Xavier. And this is one of the stories. Actually, Chico Xavier talks about the reincarnation of Emmanuel in several other situations, even in conversations with Emmanuel himself, talking about that pair, that relationship that they had. What happens is, in many cases, the spirit who is having this mediumistic mission, for instance, they have the spiritual mentor, but then they switch places. So then the other will help. So then the medium will become the mentor, and the mentor will become the medium.
Yeah. Any more questions?
I have a comment, more than a question. It may be a question in the minds of many of us over here. If you remember the story of the slave in Astoria, when he listened or he spoke, what was the apostle talking?
John the evangelist.
John, right?
Yeah, it was in Ephesus. Yeah.
Was asking Astoria, do you understand that? And he said, well, how can I understand if no one explains? So Emmanuel.
Oh, Philip with the eunuch, with the servant in Ethiopia. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
Sorry. So the slave over there. So sometimes we catch ourselves having a hard time to understand the gospel and the Bible, so we just gave up. I can't understand it. It doesn't make sense, so we give up. And then comes Emmanuel explaining, trying to help us to understand. And many of us, when we read Emmanuel, or when we listen to a lecture about Emmanuel, we still find difficult to understand. Right? So I was thinking myself, how do we go about it, understanding it? How do we create the habit to understand it? Right? So sometimes we have so many troubles at home, in the work, and our minds just don't connect with this kind of topic, this kind of lecture. How do we do it, right? Maybe one of the things that our friends from other religions do, Catholics or Protestants or Anglicans, right? They have their daily devotionals. I'm not sure if you guys ever saw a devotional, that book with 365 messages, and they encourage people to read once a day, right? And if you pick the books from Emmanuel, the lessons study actually one versicle, one little passage, and he writes usually 1 or 2 pages about it. So a very good way for us to start connecting, start listening, is to create this habit of once a day, or even it's once every other day or once a week, right? To read one of those and gradually starts to connect. If my husband doesn't think the same, go to the bathroom and read it alone. If my wife doesn't agree with that, just go to your room, go to the backyard and read it alone. And gradually things will start changing. Gradually we will start understanding or connecting or be more interesting to hear. And you will see that gradually even the environment at home changes. It's like the gospel at home. When one person wants to do it, the whole family is agitated, no one wants to do it. Go to a place and you do it alone. And everything starts gradually to change. That's how we start, because sometimes when we listen to a lecture like Tiago, we don't know how to get started, right? So here we are, preparing ourselves to study Emmanuel for the entire year, but it's important that individually we give ourselves a chance to go very slowly and understand that. So that question just triggered that in my mind. I wanted to share.
And one interesting point about that, if I may still, is in many cases, especially when Emmanuel is writing, making comments about passages of the gospel, sometimes he chooses one phrase out of one entire chapter. And we cannot only take that phrase, because some of his comments might seem a little disconnected at first from the meaning of that 1 or 2 phrases. However, it is an invitation for us to go back to the gospel, for instance, and to read that chapter. In reading that chapter, after reading the comment from Emmanuel, another light opens to us. Because we will understand that what Emmanuel is doing is bringing an entire context of a historical context of who Jesus was talking to in that moment, why he was saying what he was saying, with which purpose. And more than that, he can bring us the meaning applied to our own lives. We are not anymore 2,000 years ago. And the light of the Spiritism means how to bring those lessons to everyday life with the knowledge, with the understanding, with the intelligence, with the willingness, with the will that we have, in order to not only comprehend, but if we don't put in practice, it has no meaning. But if we look for to put those lessons in practice, it will have an impact in our lives that might be even sooner than we all can imagine, if we give that chance. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank
you
you.
very much, Tiago. It was really enlightening for all of us. And as you said really well, Spiritism really doesn't come to fight things, to destroy things, to question things that much. Mostly to allow us to think freely and rationalize our faith. And that's why reading these books and passages really do help us open our minds a little bit, rationalize our faith, not only take things for granted anymore. because that time of our existences has gone. It's about time for us to rationalize what we think, what we do, and why we do it. Because that's the only way we have to learn and to really incorporate that into our lives, like Tiago said. So, with the blessings of Emmanuel and all the beloved spirits that help us here at TSS in our daily lives, we're going to continue with our passes. So for those of you who are unaware what the passes are, they represent a transfusion of good energies. Just like we go to the hospital and we have a blood transfusion. Now we're here having a transfusion of all this